Clarence Horton. On behalf of historic Cabarrus and Cabarrus County, welcome to another historical moment in the story of old Cabarrus County and her people. This is our second segment on the growth and the tragic decline of textiles in Cabarrus County. It began with a small steam-powered mill in Concord, grew into the giant Odell and Cannon chains. It resulted in James William Cannon's model mill town in northern Cabarrus County, which became the modern city of Kannapolis. When James William Cannon died in 1921, leadership passed to his son, Charles A. Cannon, and for 50 years he provided leadership for the Cannon group of mills. During that productive period, the growth of the mill and the story of the town are so interwoven that it's difficult to separate one from the other. So join us then, if you will, please, for the second part of our series, which we call Kannapolis in Mid-Century. It was often said of J.W. Cannon that he could see further than most men, and that he was an unrivaled judge of character. That's certainly true in his choice of his youngest, soft-spoken, modest son, Charles A. Cannon, as the heir apparent of the giant Cannon interest to succeed his father. C.A. Cannon was born in 1892 in Concord at his family's red brick home on North Union Street, the youngest of 6 sons of James William Cannon and his wife Mariella Bost Cannon. He was born to be a textile man. When he began to attend Davidson College, he soon left after a year, feeling that nothing that he could learn there would prepare him for work in his father's mills. Some of his later biographers suggest that it might have been, in part, his pursuit of the lovely Ruth Louise Coltrane of Concord, daughter of Daniel Branson Coltrane, who brought modern banking and the telephone to Cabarrus County. In this treasured Coltrane family portrait, Ruth Louise Coltrane is on the back row with her sisters, second from the left. J.W. Cannon quickly put his youngest son's decision to be a textile man to the test. He started him to work as a clerk at the old Franklin Street mill, the first Cannon manufacturing plant, at the grand sum of 30 cents a day. Charles soon showed a natural talent and what became a lifelong love for the textile business. Shortly thereafter, he was promoted as manager of the Behringer plant in Rockwell. Many of the old-timers in Concord recall seeing Charles roar off to Rockwell on his motorcycle, carrying the payroll for the Behringer mill employees, and wondered aloud if Jim Cannon's son was going to kill himself on that fool thing. Well, fortunately, he not only didn't kill himself, but he won the hand of the fair Ruth Louise Coltrane, and according to records in the Cabarrus County Register of Deeds, the couple were married at the home of Daniel Branson Coltrane, father of the bride. Her older brother, L.D. Coltrane, was present as a witness. In 1913, young Charles Cannon was elected a director in Cannon Manufacturing Company. A few years later, he was elected a vice president of Cannon Manufacturing Company during the presidency of his older brother, Martin L. Cannon. When J.W. Cannon was elected to the newly formed post of chairman of the board of Cannon Manufacturing, Charles became president of Cannon Manufacturing Company, and his brother Martin L. Cannon became president of Cabarrus Cotton Mills. When his father died in 1921, Charles retained the presidency of Cannon Manufacturing and also became its chief executive officer. He was then only 29 years of age. Charles Cannon always revered his father's memory, modestly stating that J.W. Cannon started the business and he merely tried to keep the doors open. In 1923, he demonstrated his merchandising genius as he located a sewing machine which would sew Cannon labels into each individual Cannon towel, carrying the Cannon name around the globe as a symbol of textile quality. He designed the familiar company trademark, consisting of a Napoleon howitzer with cannonballs on a background of white, That replaced the old trademark the Cannon had used of the Cannoneer. C.A. Cannon also was a pioneer in the use of national advertising as he advertised Cannon products in women's magazines throughout the country. During that same productive period in 1923, he enlarged the company's main office again and also installed the first large lighted sign behind Cannon Mills Company Lake. All his life, Charles Cannon continued his father's emphasis on quality public education. Because of the overcrowding in Old South School, or Bekever, and North School, Woodrow Wilson, in Kannapolis, it was necessary to build a new school building. In 1924, Cannon Mills Company donated a tract of land along Rose Avenue in Kannapolis for the construction of a new building to act as a high school for the area. By the end of 1924, that 19-room school building was completed and ready for occupancy by students returning from their Christmas holidays. School was at first known as Kannapolis or Central High School. Later, the school board named it J.W. Cannon High School in honor of the founder of Cannon Mills Company. Unfortunately, that first school was lost to fire in 1934, but was rebuilt and reopened with a gymnasium in May of 1935. Cannon High School served as the high school for Kannapolis area until 1952, when A.L. Brown High School opened. J.W. Cannon became a junior high school when a new middle school was built for the Kannapolis area and the old Cannon High School was abandoned. Later, it was tragically lost to fire. In 1928, Charles Cannon led the consolidation of 9 textile mills, commonly known as the Cannon Group, into one giant corporation, Cannon Mills Company. In later years, Mr. Cannon said it was the best day's work he had ever done and credited the action with helping the corporation weather the Great Depression. During that same year, the Cannon family completed construction on their new neo-federal home on North Union Street in Concord and moved there with their 4 children, Charles Jr., William C., Miriam, and Mary Ruth Cannon. In 1928, the Cannon Mills Company led the textile industry when it inaugurated its own medical department. That action was really the culmination of a long-term commitment to improving the health care of its employees. A young Charles Cannon had persuaded his father to hire a nurse to provide minimal health care for the employees. In 1917, Cannon Mills Company sponsored a campaign to wipe out typhoid fever, offering all of its employees inoculation against that disease. As president, Charles Cannon provided influenza shots and tuberculosis screening for all Cannon Mills employees. In 1955, Mr. Cannon almost single-handedly wiped out polio in Cabarrus County when the Salk vaccine was offered to all children in the county. After the children had been inoculated, the remaining vaccine was distributed among adults in the county. In 1935, Charles Cannon and his mother, Mariella Boss Cannon, helped bring the dream of a modern local hospital to life when Ms. Cannon donated the necessary land and Charles Cannon supplemented the funds from a bond issue to erect the first building for Cabarrus Memorial Hospital. Mr. Cannon then served as chairman of the board of the hospital from 1935 through his resignation in 1967. During that long period, he frequently supported the hospital effort financially, as well as planning for its continued expansion and growth. It seems particularly fitting that the historical marker erected to Mr. Cannon prominently mentions his contributions to local health care. The Great Depression did not close the doors of any of the well-managed Cannon Mills Company plants, and both Kannapolis and Cabarrus County survived those cruel years. An entire generation of Kannapolis workers were always grateful to Charles Cannon because the mill doors were kept open and jobs were found so that at least one person in each family could continue working. although there were no new orders coming in, and mill warehouses were bulging with unsold goods. In the early 1930s, Cannon Mills Company began the production of sheets. Later, the Cannon Mills sign was renovated and enlarged so that it was lighted by 1,800 light bulbs and proclaimed to the world that Cannon Mills Company was the largest manufacturer of towels in the world. During the latter part of the Depression, a blue eagle was added to the sign, and the words, "We do our part," to symbolize Cannon's compliance with the provisions of the National Recovery Act. In 1945, the familiar sign was renovated an additional time and changed to neon lighting. The wording was changed to read that Cannon was the largest manufacturer of household textiles in the world. Later, the wording was changed once again to proclaim that Cannon was a leading manufacturer of household textiles. The Kannapolis newspaper reported in 1933 that Cannon warehouses were bulging with unsold orders, although Cannon Mills Company continued to pay the highest wages in the textile industry. In other communities, some plants remained open, but hours were reduced and wages were cut. In protest, the Textile Workers Union called a general strike in the textile industry to begin on Labor Day 1934. Workers walked out of plants across the South, including plants in Cabarrus County. The National Guard was called into Kannapolis and to Concord to prevent any acts of violence. A National Guard unit from Winston-Salem was housed in Mariella Hall in Kannapolis, near the main Cannon Mill plant. Fortunately, the strike was settled within 3 weeks, and workers in Kannapolis and Concord soon returned to their jobs. Although Charles Cannon received many honors and awards during a lifetime of achievement and service, he was proudest of a citation from Governor O. Max Gardner and the North Carolina Council of State, thanking him for his role in preventing North Carolina from defaulting on her obligations during the worst days of the Depression. It seems that when the short-term notes came due, New York bankers refused to extend the funds necessary to renew the notes, and it appeared that the state would default on her obligations for the first time in her long history. Mr. Cannon had substantial funds on deposit with the same bankers, and at the request of friends, he and John W. Haynes, an industrialist from Winston-Salem, intervened with the bankers and gently persuaded them to extend the necessary credit. Mr. Cannon even offered, according to the traditional account, if necessary, to withdraw his own personal funds from the banks and buy the obligations of the state himself in order to save her from default. In addition to extensive renovations and construction in the suburbs of Kannapolis, downtown Kannapolis began to take on a different appearance in the latter 1930s. Charles and Ruth Cannon visited Williamsburg, Virginia, and saw the beautiful remodeling and renovation work being done there, and returned home determined to make a difference in the appearance of downtown Kannapolis. As a result, Charles Cannon hired C.E. Swanson Associates, an architectural firm in Chicago, to draft an overall architectural blueprint for downtown Kannapolis and allow it to be remodeled along colonial Williamsburg lines. As part of that project, a majestic building was built for Montgomery Ward Company along South Main Street in Kannapolis at its intersection with West B Street. Sewell Avery, the chairman of the board of Montgomery Ward, was a personal friend of Mr. Cannon's, and the new building was constructed with every attention to architectural detail and with beautiful brickwork. That building, together with the next door professional building, came to symbolize downtown Kannapolis for many of us growing up here. Until its destruction in 1990, many Kannapolis residents remembered the sound of the rooftop siren on Montgomery Ward being sounded in times of disaster or fire. For young people growing up in Kannapolis, the YMCA was the center of life. That first 1908 YMCA was so popular that its increased membership made construction of a newer and larger building necessary. In 1925, Charles Cannon, with the support and encouragement of his mother, Mrs. J.W. Cannon, constructed a second YMCA. The new Moorish-style architecture building boasted a 1,400-seat theater and much greater space for increased activities. At one point in time, the second YMCA boasted the largest membership under one roof in the entire southeastern United States. In December 1937, that second Y was lost to fire. But the fire had a good consequence because it led to the construction of a third YMCA, a Williamsburg-style, new and larger building, which was completed and opened in 1940. With the encouragement of Mrs. Ruth Cannon, the new Y was the first YMCA in the South to offer services for the entire family, boasting a separate department for women and girls. For those of us growing up in post-World War II Kannapolis, the new YMCA was the center of sports, cultural, and civic life for the entire community. Our parents and grandparents had a wide choice of clubs and orders in the 1930s. Men attended the Masons and the Odd Fellows, Junior Order of Woodmen, the Red Men, and the Lions Club, while women attended the Order of Pocahontas, the Order of the Eastern Star, and the King's Daughters. The Kannapolis Pilot Club was organized in 1942. In 1937, Cannon Mills Company celebrated its 50th anniversary and got together with all its employees at a giant celebration that year. At the end of the year, the company instituted what became an annual banquet at which loyal employees were rewarded with a service emblem presented to them by Mr. Cannon, recognizing their many years of faithful service. In 1940, local newspapermen Jazzy Moore and Tom Wingate made the first attempt to record the history of Kannapolis in their widely distributed book, Cabarrus Reborn. The 1940 YMCA did not include a movie theater because the new gym theater was built to provide family entertainment for the Kannapolis community. Acts were presented both live and on film in the facility. The beautiful Art Deco building was often spoken of as being the finest theater facility between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by fire in February 1942. However, after the war, it was rebuilt to its original beautiful specifications. Although the center of business was still in downtown Kannapolis, new businesses began to rapidly spring up in the later 1930s along the new highway which was built to the east of Kannapolis in an effort to relieve some of the congestion on heavily traveled Main Street. New business districts sprung up along the highway, which would later be called Cannon Boulevard, particularly in the area of Jackson Park and the Royal Oaks section of Kannapolis. Those commercial buildings, which were built in the later 1930s, all bear a distinctive orange Tennessee stone, and many of the buildings bear the dates of their construction in 1938 and 1939. US 29 between Kannapolis and Glass was widened to 3 lanes and paved with concrete in 1935. The nearby business section of Midway was thriving, and the Centerview Business District was filled with bustling new businesses. The beginnings of World War II put all the dreams on hold. Although there were important government contracts to be filled by the mills, new construction ground almost to a halt, as all the scarce materials had to be gathered for the war effort. The young men and women of the area answered their country's call to the colors and left good jobs to be filled in the mills. Elsewhere, citizens rallied around. Scarce goods were rationed, but other goods were gathered together for the war effort. Citizens collected the tinfoil from cigarette packs and took scrap metal to redemption centers. the country rallied behind President Roosevelt for survival. A banner in the window of a home signified that a child from the home was in service. A star on that banner tragically meant that a child had been lost in combat. President Roosevelt died in 1945. The hearts of the nation collectively sank for a time. The president died at his cottage in Warm Springs, Georgia, and the funeral train carrying his body passed through Kannapolis on his trip north. On the evening of Friday, April 13, 1945, hundreds of Kannapolis residents, together with many children, lined both sides of the Southern Railway tracks to watch the body of the president pass. According to some estimates, more than 6,000 people, perhaps as many as 10,000, lined the tracks all the way from Midway to North Kannapolis to watch the president pass. Many of the children there had never known another president during their entire lifetime. With the end of the war in 1945, young men and women returned to Kannapolis anxious to resume their lives, to marry, and to start a family. Not all returned from the war, unfortunately. Charles Cannon and Ruth Cannon joined those who had lost a child in combat. C.A. Cannon Jr., a decorated fighter pilot, was lost in the China, India, Burma theater of operations. Charles Cannon was determined that those young people who did return would have not only a job waiting them, but would have a good place to live and to start a family. Cannon Mills Company erected 100 small, four-room, prefabricated homes off King and Golston Streets in the area of West C Street, so they'd have a place to live and to begin those families. Many young people in Kannapolis moved there, including so many members of the military, that the small community took the name GI Town. And people still talk about starting their life there in the small houses. Unfortunately, most of those houses have now been moved from their original sites. But the Clarice Women's Club, working together with Kannapolis History Associates, managed to preserve one of the small houses for history. Although Charles Cannon was unfailingly polite and usually soft-spoken, he was angered by any government action which he felt endangered the textile industry or the jobs that it created. During World War II, he fought the Office of Price Administration for the right to raise the wages of Cannon Mill Company employees, which had been frozen in an effort to prevent inflation. During the period of growth following the end of the war, he worked hard as the chief spokesman for the textile industry, fighting the practice which was then known as two-price cotton, that is, the practice of making cotton cheaper to the foreign manufacturers than to American manufacturers. He didn't like to travel by air, so he traveled back and forth on the railroad to and from Washington, D.C., walking the halls of Congress, until victory was finally assured. When he was told about the successful conclusion to the fight during the early hours of one morning, he was exhausted and said he never felt more like crying in his entire life. Another Kannapolis tradition had its beginnings in the days following the end of World War II. Miss C.A. Cannon permitted the use of her beloved country home outside Kannapolis for pity's sake for an annual Easter sunrise service beginning in 1947. Bess Breedlove, who was the first secretary of the women's department of the Kannapolis YMCA, planned the program so that the announcement came at the exact moment of sunrise. Many older Kannapolis residents still remember the wonderful taste of coffee and hot chocolate on those cold Easter mornings. For her efforts in organizing the women's department and making it one of the premier departments in the South, Bess Breedlove was named Woman of the Year for Kannapolis in 1948, together with Reverend Fred Goodman. Reverend Goodman followed a long line of distinguished recipients, beginning with T.C. McKnight in 1940, A.L. Brown in 1941, and Charles A. Cannon in 1942. Okay. By 1950, Kannapolis had begun to come of age. The post office estimated its population at 35,000 persons, and its area at about 30 square miles, in sharp contrast to the 1930 estimate of 12,000 persons. There were 80 churches representing 22 denominations, 8 movie theaters, including 2 drive-ins, the Park Inn and the Plaza, seated a total of 4,200 persons. The 9 public schools, which included Cannon High School, had 5,400 pupils and 181 teachers. After the 1950 membership campaign, there were 9,500 men, women, and children on the YMCA rolls. The police force had grown to 17 officers, with 4 patrol cars and 1 motorcycle. Although not heralded outside his family, 1951 saw the birth of a child named Dale Earnhardt, who would have a profound effect on the sport of stock car racing and who would bring acclaim to his hometown. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president in an era of great material prosperity. We all still remember the music of the 50s, 3D movies, Bobby Socks and Penny Loafers, and the annual battles with Concord for the Bell. The Russians exploded an H-bomb, and television revolutionized our social life. The story of mid-20th century Kannapolis and the United States ends with the beginning of a tragic conflict in a distant land called Vietnam. A conflict which was an undeclared war, but which would have terrible consequences for the Kannapolis area and for the United States. For many in Kannapolis, an era ended with the death of Ruth Coltrane Cannon, a grand lady who loved art and music and books and devoted much of her life to the preservation of historic homes and gardens throughout the state of North Carolina. Ms. Cannon encouraged her husband, Charles Cannon, to renovate and modernize downtown Kannapolis in the Williamsburg style of architecture. Her loss in 1965 and the earlier loss by fire of For Pity's Sake, her beloved country home, were both fitting symbols for the end of an era in Kannapolis. In 1971, Charles Cannon joined Ms. Ruth in death. He had received numerous honors prior to his death. He had been named Man of the Year in Kannapolis and in Concord and by the textile industry. He had been awarded numerous honorary degrees from Duke University in North Carolina State, from Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina. He had received many other accolades, but remained the quiet and unassuming man he always was. He was proudest of the fact that during the 50 years he was at the helm of Cannon Mills Company, both as president and as chairman of the board, he was credited with creating at least 1 new job for each day during that long 50-year leadership period. Few things meant as much to a modest Charles A. Cannon as did the accolades of his fellow citizens. Thus, he was deeply moved in 1967, on his 75th birthday, when the citizens of Kannapolis sponsored a Charles A. Cannon Appreciation Day in honor of his many contributions to the community. Governor Dan K. Moore was the featured speaker at the meeting, at which Mr. Cannon was presented with a large leather-bound volume gathering together letters and tributes from ordinary citizens in Kannapolis, as well as business and civic and religious leaders, honoring and thanking him for his long period of service. It was a fitting tribute for one whose life was so deeply entwined with the people and businesses of this unique city. Mr. Cannon was taken ill at his desk on April 1st, 1971, while working on a stockholders report with mill president Don Holt. He died the following day. Tributes and flowers flooded into the mill offices and to the Cannon home in Concord from all over the state. The funeral was attended by Governor Bob Scott and members of the Council of State, together with dignitaries and officials from across the state of North Carolina. The state flags were ordered to be flown at half-mast. Mr. Cannon would probably have been most honored, however, by the hundreds of his employees who came to his home on North Union Street in Concord to pay their final respects to a man who had meant so much to them, their families, and their community. Mr. Cannon left Cannon Mills Company in sound financial condition, with no long-term debt, and also with the unbounded confidence and optimism he had for the future of Kannapolis, the textile industry, and the United States. Today, however, even as we film this segment, workmen and giant machines continue to tear down the walls of those old plants and signal the end of a treasured way of life. Please join us as we continue with the last years of an empire of loom and the beginning of a new era for the town that Jim Cannon built. Thank you for being with us as we turn another page in the history of this special place, this Cabarrus.